We're up to the fourth bracha in Birchas Hamazon, the bracha of Atov HaMeitiv. Everybody knows the first three brachas are the Iraisa. This fourth bracha of Atov HaMeitiv is Midrabanon, and that's why it begins with a Baruch Ato Hashem. It's not considered a bracha Asmuchil Chavrta because we switched over from brachas that were the Iraisa to brachas that are Midrabanon. So this bracha of Atov HaMeitiv, which we know is the Drabanon, so we all know that Chazal tells us, the Gemara tells us, B'Yavne Tiknuha, that in Yavne, the Bezdin in Yavne, they were misakin that we should say this fourth bracha of Atov HaMeitiv. Why? Because after the Haruge Beita were brought to Kvura, now remember, after Churban Bayis Sheni, Klal Yisrael still lived around in Eretz Yisrael in certain areas, and the final, was considered the final Golus, that Klal Yisrael was finally wiped out from Eretz Yisrael, was the city of Beitar, which had originally had millions of Jews, and they were wiped out. And it took a few years till the Romans allowed them to be brought to Kvura. When the Romans finally allowed it, and they went to bury them, they found that the bodies had not decomposed even. That the Rebbeinu Shalom made a ness that the bodies stayed intact. And the Chachamim in Yavne, based on this ness, were misakin this bracha of Atov HaMeitiv. Hatov, the good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did Shaloi Yisrichu. The Gemara tells us that the bodies did not decompose. VaHaMeitiv, and the Rebbeinu Shalom did even more good to us by allowing them to be nikvar, to be buried in Kfuras Yisrael. And there was a huge ness because it was a few years. There's different versions in history. Exactly how many years it was, 2.5 years approximately. Some say a little more, a little less. But it's definitely years of out in the sun, the heat of Eretz Yisrael. Bodies should be decomposing in hours. Forget about years. It was a huge ness. But the obvious question that we have to ask ourselves is what shaykhis, what's the connection to Birchas Hamazon? Why good? They were misakin, we should make a bracha at some point, we should thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but every time we eat, what's the connection between food, between every time we eat, and this bracha of Atov HaMeitiv, that this one miracle is so special, that we have to remember it every single time we eat, we bench, we have to say it. So the Aruch HaShulchan explains, he's bothered by this question, and he explains, in Siman Kuf Pei Tesev Beis, he says, the Ikra Shel Bircha Bracha Shaykh Yisrael Birchas Hamazon. He says, and he answers that this idea of making a bracha of Atov HaMeitiv for what happened in Beitar is connected to Birchas Hamazon. Why? The Kach Omru Chacham Sham B'Shah Shenit Naruge Beitar L'Kfura Tiknu B'Yavna Atov HaMeitiv. Atov Shlo Yisrichu, the Tov that was done that they didn't compose HaMeitiv, they were brought to Kfura. Kleimar. So he explains, Lo Hoyrois Lanu to teach us. Shafilu b'shas kaisa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even when Hashem is angry on us, oise imanu nisim v'niflois. Even when we're in a matzav in galus, and it's very obvious that the Rebbeinu Shalom is upset at us. We did things we shouldn't have done. He's still doing miracles. Nisim v'niflois. The ein l'cha nisim v'dayil meil. There's no greater miracle than this. Harukei Beitar sheyimunachim rabbi shanim. Those from Beitar who were lying for many years, al pnei arts v'lo yisrichu, and they didn't compose. And they even were able to get Kfuras Yisrael. He says, this is a simin sha'akadosh baruch hu lo yazev yisonu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will never forsake us lo olam forever. Af be'ez shanu choitim. Even at a time when we were doing sins. Right? Ki dichsiv yasoy yisra nikav Hashem l'amavis lo yinus anonim. Val ki ikri atzoris. He says, so what shaykh is to Birchas Hamazon? He says, what's the ikr tzara? What's the main sorrow we're going to have when we're in Golus on a regular basis? From time to time, there's shreklicha persecution. From time to time, there's different types of things. But what is an ongoing tzara? He says an ongoing tzara is a tzara of anius, of poverty, of not being able to afford food. And he brings the Gemara Bava Basra that quotes a pasuk in Iyuv. The Gemara Bava Basra tells us on Daf Kufter Zayin, Dorash Pinchas Bar Chomer Darshint, Kosha aniyas b'soich be'isoi shel Adam, that poverty in someone's house is worse. Yosim mechamisha makas, worse than 50 makas, based on the pasuk in Iyuv that says Chanuni atem rei ki yad elika nogabi. that poverty is one of the worst things that could happen. Kosh ani, it's for worse than 50 makis. Therefore, therefore, so that we should not be worried that we're in Golus, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to forsake us. We're going to be stuck without bread. Therefore, Chazal mesakin this bracha teva meitiv by branching. Why? To say we say we realize that the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to take care of us always, even when we do sins. And just like the Haruge Beitar, right? And Klal Yisrael had sinned, and the Rebbeinu Shalom was angry at Klal Yisrael, and yet he did this openness. We should realize every time we eat, it's an openness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us, and He will be Ali Chasreinu. He will continue doing this for us throughout the Golus, making sure we have our food to eat. It's a huge ness, and Rebbeinu Shalom keeps on doing nisim for us, even though we're chaytei, even though we're in Golus, and therefore we remind ourselves about this every time we eat, that we're not in poverty, that we have the food, and He'll keep on giving us the food, and therefore we say it in Birchas Hamazon.